The statement that I'm going to make today, very simply, is a statement that I will be not available for re-election at the DA's Federal Congress on May the 9th. This has been a decision that was taken last week after consideration over not only months but years. And such decisions are a long time coming, but in the end they are made suddenly because the time is right and one feels that it is right. And very often people have asked me, how long will you stay as the leader of the Democratic Alliance? And I've always answered, I will know when the time is right. And believe me, I know that the time is right. And that is the reason that I will not be making myself available for re-election on the 9th of May. I have prepared a very personal statement. It is a statement that I obviously wrote myself, as I do with most of the statements that I write, and I'm going to read it to you, and then I'd be very happy to take questions from you. The statement goes as follows. One of the many things I have learnt during the last 8 years is that it is easier to lead a sphere of government than a political party. In executive government office, the rules are clear. In party politics, one works on intuition, on the advice of colleagues, and often on sheer instinct. A relevant example, and certainly relevant to today's discussion, is the leader's term of office. In South Africa, we have term limits for presidents, for premiers, and for mayors. But we don't have term limits for leaders of political parties. So when I became mayor of Cape Town in 2006, and later Premier of the Western Cape in 2009, I knew that I could serve a maximum of 10 years in each position, divided into 2 5-year terms if I was re-elected. It goes without saying, and I must stress this, that I have every intention of completing my second term as Premier of the Western Cape, to which I was elected in May last year. I was elected as Premier, I stood as Premier, and I intend to fulfill my commitment to the voters. And this term as Premier of the Western Cape is due to end in mid-2019, when the next election is due. As a mayor, or as a Premier, and of course as a President as well, although I don't know what that feels like, but I have been both a mayor and a Premier, the Constitution and the law define your duties and set clear parameters on what you may and what you must do, and of course, by extension, what you may not do. So in executive office in government, you are a creature of statute. You are only allowed to do what the law tells you to do, or tells you that you have to do, and you may not do anything else. But leading a political party is quite a different matter. Although parties do have their own constitutions, and they do have their decision-making structures, one of which has just met the Federal Executive of the Democratic Alliance, much of the job of being a leader boils down to decisions and actions that are informed by one's own intuition. One has to read a situation and try to get as close to a particular reality as it is possible to do. And then one has to reach the right conclusion in that context. And the leader of a political party does this every single day, often in complex and rapidly changing contexts and often bombarded by contradictory advice. Often when you're sitting there covering the news as you should and as you must, we're having to take decisions on a position on various issues. And the issue is unfolding, and I, as the leader, often have to take decisions, and many people are giving me advice, and they're often giving me contradictory advice, and then you have to reach a conclusion and go into a particular direction and lead. And whether the decision turns out over time to have been right or to have been wrong, there are always people who oppose it, and that is the nature of politics. And let me tell you, there's another thing I've learned about politics. You can't tell whether a decision is right or wrong necessarily in the moment. History often determines whether a decision was right or wrong. And that is why when I take decisions, I usually try to project myself into the future, to say, if I looked back from the vantage point of the future, what would have been right and what would have been wrong? And that way of working has served me well. It is in this kind of context, very complex, bombarded by different advice, concerned with very particular and compelling considerations, that I've had to decide whether or not to stand for another term as the leader of the Democratic Alliance at this year's Federal Congress on the 9th of May. I've led the DA for 8 years now. Sometimes it feels like 80 years, sometimes it feels just like 8 months. But the truth is, I've led the DA for 8 years now. And I've worked closely with many outstanding people, some of which, and these are our provincial leaders and our chairperson of the party and our federal deputy chairpersons of the party. This major leadership team is what you see in front of you today. I have worked with absolutely outstanding people, and those on the FedEx who've just met before this press conference, I include them, and many, many others. From the start, from the day I was elected leader of the DA, on a day I'll never forget, in Midrand, on the 6th of May in 2007, I resolved that the outer limit of my term as party leader would be 10 years. Not because our constitution prescribes that, as I said, there are no term limits in party constitutions, but because I believe that every political party needs renewal and needs fresh blood after a decade, no matter how well the incumbent team may have performed. And I think that we as a team, if you look across this team, have done our very best for the Democratic Alliance to perform as well as we possibly could.